Imagine you have just been hired to oversee the construction of a $1 billion world-class art museum.
Oh, wow. Okay, no pressure.
Right. Huge deal. So you walk into your first major planning meeting, you sit down at the head of the table, and you realize with absolute horror that your entire team is refusing to buy anything but, like, bargain bin discount apartment materials.
Oh, that is a nightmare.
It gets worse. To top it off, your CEO is demanding these architectural miracles, but absolutely refuses to give you a bigger budget.
Of course. Because why would they?
Exactly. And usually this is where a manager starts shouting or, at the very least starts firing people. But today's source material argues that fighting back or forcing your agenda is actually the exact wrong move.
It is incredibly counterintuitive, isn't it? Because, I mean, every natural managerial instinct we have tells us to assert dominance in that moment.
Yeah, to just take control.
Exactly. To point at the whiteboard, highlight the flawed logic, and just mandate a correction.
Right, we just want to categorize things as right and wrong, fix the error, and move on. But that logic completely falls apart when you step into the real world of team dynamics and clashing egos and, well, unyielding expectations.
It really does. It's so messy.
So for today's deep dive, we are unpacking a fascinating real-world case study about a professional project lead, actually, who was caught in this exact nightmare scenario.
And it's such a relatable scenario, even if you aren't building a museum.
Exactly. Our mission today is to extract the highly specific methods our source provides for resolving this kind of intense workplace conflict. We're going to focus on how you genuinely respect opponents in a disagreement and the precise sequential order for coordinating opinions to break a deadlock.
And to really grasp those methods, we have to look at the psychological foundation the source lays out first. Because this project lead isn't just dealing with a stubborn team, they are dealing with massive personal trauma.
Yeah, that context is huge.
Right. The source notes that just prior to taking this high-stress luxury construction job, this person's previous company went entirely bankrupt.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source introduces a striking concept right out of the gate here. It describes that previous bankruptcy and this current overwhelming new job as a modern-day exile.
What's fascinating here is how the source reframes the concept of failure.
How so?
Well, in this philosophy, the systems of the world, the market, your industry, the universe, they don't send you into exile out of spite. It's not a punishment.
Right.
The source argues that you face bankruptcy or a catastrophic career setback because you hit a ceiling in your own capabilities. You lacked the necessary study or preparation or adaptability for your previous environment, so you're just removed from it.
Wow. I mean, that is a tough pill to swallow. If my company tanks and now I'm surrounded by staff who won't listen to me, my first instinct is definitely not to look inward.
No, of course not.
Isn't it completely natural to be angry? To blame the terrible economy or the stubborn staff or the unreasonable chairman who put me in this mess?
It's entirely natural. I mean, it's human instinct to externalize blame when we feel threatened. But the source issues a very stark warning about giving into that instinct during your exile.
Oh, the poison bowl thing.
Yes. If you spend this period complaining, blaming your team, and resenting your environment instead of studying it, you will eventually receive what the source calls the poison bowl.
The poison bowl. The source uses some really intense imagery there. But let's ground that in reality for a second. What does the poison bowl actually look like in a, modern corporate setting?
It's basically the absolute collapse of your professional capital.
Like getting blacklisted.
Essentially, yeah. If you fight the environment instead of learning from it, you become known as toxic, rigid, and just impossible to work with. The modern poison bowl is chronic burnout, severed industry networks, and ultimate unemployability.
Yikes. So how do we avoid that?
To avoid that, the source insists on a radical perspective shift. This difficult exile is actually a strict 3-year period of reflection.
Okay, so it's less like being banished to a wasteland and more like, fallow ground in agriculture.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like the soil isn't dead, but it has to be intentionally left unplanted, just left to deal with the raw elements so it can regenerate the nutrients required for a much higher yield crop next season.
That is a perfect way to look at it. You are the fallow ground, which means you have to accept that this terrible friction you're experiencing, these stubborn employees who want to build a luxury hotel with cheap linoleum.
Ah, the linoleum.
Right. They are exactly the study material you are meant to master right now. You aren't there to force them to build a museum. You are there to learn how to lead people who actively resist your vision.
Okay, but accepting that these difficult people are your curriculum is one thing. Practically speaking, how do you actually sit in a room with a team demanding cheap materials for a world-class project without losing your mind?
That is the million-dollar question.
This leads us to the source's radical redefinition of the word respect, and I have to admit, I really struggled with this part.
It is arguably the most challenging directives in the entire case study. The source is adamant that true leadership requires respecting everyone in your environment, from the chairman of the board down to the junior site workers.
Sure, that sounds nice on paper.
But the friction comes from how the source defines respect.
Right, because it defines respect purely as listening. Just listening.
Exactly.
And I have to push back here on behalf of any manager listening right now. If the staff are suggesting we use the budget and materials of a discount apartment complex for a high-end art museum, they are objectively wrong.
Yes, they are.
The source even acknowledges these ideas are often ridiculous, so if I sit there and let them present a terrible idea for an hour, aren't I just wasting valuable time? Why shouldn't I just say, no, that's wrong, here's the correct budget, and move on?
Because the moment you do that, you sever the relationship. And when you sever the relationship, you lose the mandate to lead. This is where we have to separate the idea from the human being. The source makes a crucial mechanical distinction here. Listening does not mean agreeing.
So I'm not actually using the cheap linoleum.
Absolutely not. You are not going to use cheap linoleum in the museum. But discarding someone's idea out of hand, simply because you know it's weak from your higher vantage point, is the ultimate form of disrespect.
So it's really about psychological safety.
Yes.
But if I'm not going to use their idea, aren't I just playing therapist? What is the actual practical point of listening to it?
You are doing vital reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance. Interesting.
When you dismiss their input quickly, they learn that it is dangerous to share their thoughts with you. They shut down. They will comply with your orders maliciously, doing exactly what you say and just watching you fail.
Oh, malicious compliance is the worst.
It destroys companies. But if you provide a space where they feel comfortable voicing their flawed thoughts without fear of humiliation, you are maintaining the connective tissue of the team. You are holding space. You receive their words, you acknowledge them, and you keep your right to lead intact.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because the source argues that listening to these flawed ideas isn't just about making people feel validated or maintaining social capital. There is a very real neurological and strategic importance to gathering this seemingly useless data.
Yes, and to explain the mechanics behind this, the source draws a brilliant comparison between artificial intelligence and human capability.
Which is incredibly relevant for anyone trying to figure out their value in the modern workplace right now.
Exactly. I mean, the source points out that AI can and will absorb all the data, facts, and standard operating procedures in the world. If we're talking about pure information retrieval or running a cost-benefit analysis on building materials, AI has us beat.
Hands down.
But the source argues AI cannot generate wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to navigate complex human nuance, to read the unspoken tension in a room, and to find harmony in deeply conflicting desires. That is an exclusively human domain.
Okay, so AI has the knowledge, humans have the wisdom, but how do we actually manufacture that wisdom? Because when I'm stressed out, staring at a team that refuses to budget properly, I certainly don't feel wise, I just feel stuck.
This is where the source introduces the mechanics of wisdom, which we can call the 70% rule.
The 70% rule. Okay.
And it answers your earlier question about why we shouldn't just shut down bad ideas immediately. The fundamental premise is that you cannot force an answer to a complex human problem. If you try to force it, your brain just cycles through the same obvious, unworkable solutions.
Like just yelling at them to follow the new budget, which we already know will cause a mutiny.
Right. Instead, by practicing that true respect we just discussed, by passively listening to all the staff's opinions, especially the absurd ones, without the pressure to correct them immediately, you are feeding your brain's background pattern recognition software.
Oh, that makes sense.
You are absorbing the raw reality of your environment. And the source states a very specific threshold. Wisdom only bursts forth naturally when you have absorbed at least 70% of the necessary inputs.
Wait, why 70%? It seems so specific. What is happening in the brain at that threshold?
Well, below that 70% mark, your brain is just reacting to individual data points.
Yeah.
You hear cheap linoleum, and your brain says, bad idea.
Right.
But as you keep listening and gathering these seemingly wrong inputs, your subconscious starts to map the unseen emotional landscape. At around that 70% saturation point, you suddenly have enough varying perspectives to triangulate the root fear driving the team's behavior.
So the staff isn't actually obsessed with cheap apartments.
Exactly. The bad idea is just a proxy. Once you hit 70%, the wisdom unlocks. You suddenly realize, oh, they aren't trying to sabotage the museum. They are utterly terrified of cost overruns because in their apartment building days, a cost overrun meant losing their jobs.
That is a huge paradigm shift.
Once your brain synthesizes that underlying truth, the solution, the precise, elegant way to navigate the chairman's demands while soothing the staff's anxieties, it reveals itself to you almost effortlessly.
So what does this all mean for our listener? If you are facing a massive gridlock right now and you feel completely out of options, this source is telling us that the problem isn't impossible. You simply haven't listened enough yet.
Precisely.
You were sitting at 50% or maybe 60% of the required input. You haven't hit the data threshold for your own brain to triangulate the solution. You have to go back into the room, close your mouth, and listen to the very people who are frustrating you the most.
It is a profound shift in perspective. Frustrating circular conversations are no longer time wasters. They are essential data gathering. You are mining for the 70%.
Okay, so let's say we've done it. We survived the modern exile. We maintained our leadership mandate by respectfully listening to terrible ideas without rolling our eyes.
Hard to do, but yes.
Very hard. We hit our 70% threshold, our brains synthesized the root fears, and boom, the wisdom unlocked. We have the perfect, elegant solution to build this luxury museum while keeping costs in check. But having the idea is only half the battle. Now we actually have to implement it.
And this is where so many brilliant managers fail. Because having the wisdom is totally useless if your method of execution creates new friction.
Right. Wait, so if I have this perfectly triangulated solution that I know will work, I'm supposed to intentionally withhold it from the wider team. Doesn't that slow down the entire production timeline?
It might feel slower on the very first day, sure, but it is exponentially faster on the back end because you are completely bypassing the organizational resistance that usually stalls projects for months.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of organizational behavior, the source provides a highly specific operational map for rolling out your solution. It is a strict cascading order of consultation, and the golden rule is absolute. You must never, ever skip levels.
Walk us through the mechanics of that sequence. How does it actually work?
Okay, so when you experience that burst of wisdom, you do not announce it in a company-wide email. You do not call a town hall meeting.
So no big reveal.
No big reveal. First, you discuss the idea exclusively with your immediate subordinate, just the person directly below you in the hierarchy. You present your insight, you ask for their feedback, and you refine the idea together.
Okay.
Then, you take the results of that discussion, which has now evolved from your idea, into a shared foundation, and you bring it to the next level down.
So you and your direct subordinate go to the middle managers.
Correct. You consult with them, you refine it again based on their specific departmental knowledge, and then you take that newly refined, multi-layered foundation to the frontline staff.
To put that in perspective, imagine a CEO who suddenly figures out the perfect strategy to pivot their struggling company. If that CEO walks right past their VP, walks past the directors, and goes straight to a 22-year-old junior developer to say, hey, start building this, it creates absolute chaos.
Total chaos.
The VP feels undermined and publicly humiliated, the director feels entirely useless, and the junior developer is just terrified.
It breeds instant toxic resentment. When you bypass the chain of communication, you are inherently disrespecting the professional agency of the people you skipped. Even if your pivot strategy is objectively brilliant, the method of delivery poisons it. They will unconsciously fight the new strategy just to regain their sense of control.
So by following this strict cascading order, what is actually happening psychologically at each level?
It creates structural respect. When you consult your immediate subordinate first, they feel deeply valued. They had a hand in shaping the final version of the wisdom. More importantly, when they help you present that refined idea to the level below them, the alignment is already built in. The lower staff won't feel bulldozed by a sudden mandate from the executives, because their direct manager, the person they trust day to day, is presenting it as a collaboratively built plan.
It's like you are building a shock absorber at every level of the company. You respected them emotionally in the beginning by listening to their bad ideas to reach 70%, and now you are respecting them procedurally by letting them co-sign the good idea before it becomes a mandate.
Exactly. The source guarantees that if you follow this sequential consultation, absorbing the shock at each level. There is no organizational conflict in the world that cannot be resolved smoothly.
Which is an incredible promise, and it completely changes how we should view conflict. I mean, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, and it is time to bring it all together. We started with a project lead drowning in an impossible situation, and what we uncovered was a comprehensive mechanical system for turning intense friction into flow.
Yeah, a complete framework.
First, we learned that to survive a high-stress conflict, you have to completely shift your mindset. You must view professional hardship as a modern exile, a fallow period where the difficult, stubborn people around you are the exact curriculum you need to study.
From there, we learned the true mechanical definition of respect. It doesn't mean agreeing with flawed ideas. It means providing the psychological safety for people to speak without being dismissed, which allows you to maintain your leadership mandate.
Which feeds directly into the 70% rule. You sit in that messy room, gathering those conflicting opinions because you are feeding your brain the data it needs to triangulate the truth. You don't force a solution. You wait until you have absorbed 70% of the emotional and practical landscape, at which point human wisdom naturally unlocks.
Right.
And finally, you execute that hard-won wisdom through a strict cascading sequence of consultation. You never skip a level. You build alignment step by step downwards, ensuring every tier of the organization co-signs the path forward.
It's a reminder that efficiency in leadership isn't about speed. It's about reducing friction.
Exactly. And whether you are trying to align an entire corporate division or you're just trying to organize a fraught family vacation with deeply stubborn relatives,
It's involved in there.
these mechanics apply. Skipping the listening phase because you think you know better or jumping the chain of command to force your way will always result in a breakdown.
Which raises an important question about where we are heading next. We talked earlier about AI taking over the execution of pure data and facts. If we follow that trajectory, AI will soon handle the budgets, the material sourcing, and the standard operating procedures. The execution will be entirely automated.
Right.
So what value does the human manager have left?
That is a fascinating thought. If the machine does the math, what is our job?
Our only job will be exactly what this source describes. Our sole professional value will be our capacity to sit in a messy room, absorb the irrational fears and flawed ideas of our team, hit that 70% threshold of emotional data, and synthesize the wisdom required to keep people moving forward together. Listening without judgment might soon be the only job requirement we have left.
Now that is going to stick with me. We really like things to be clear-cut, but it turns out sitting in the mud and listening is exactly where we need to be to find the real answers. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for the curriculum in the chaos, keep listening to the noise, and keep seeking those aha moments. We'll catch you next time.